The penthouse was less a home and more a mausoleum for a life that had never truly been lived. Marble floors, vast and white, stretched into a horizon of glass that framed the city below as a silent, glittering jewel. To Richard Sterling, it was a throne room, the pinnacle of his empire. To his wife, Eleanor, pregnant with their first child, it was a gilded cage, beautiful and impossibly cold. The silence in the cavernous living space was a roaring entity, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the soft, almost apologetic whisper of her cashmere slippers on the stone. Richard was a man forged in the crucible of ambition, a corporate gladiator who saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired. Eleanor, he believed, was his finest acquisition. Beautiful, quiet, from a family whose old name lent his new money a veneer of respectability. He saw her gentle nature not as a strength, but as a feature, a placid surface that perfectly reflected his own brilliance. He was the sun, she was the serene moon, existing only to catch his light. He moved through their shared space with the easy arrogance of a king, his cologne, a sharp, metallic scent of ozone and citrus, arriving moments before he did. He rarely looked at her, not truly. His eyes would scan her, a cursory inventory check, before settling on his phone, his tablet, the television screen broadcasting the market numbers that were the true object of his affection. She was the ghost in his machine, a silent partner in a marriage that felt more like a long, exquisitely furnished business arrangement. The brewing storm began as they all do, with subtle shifts in the atmosphere. It was the late nights he explained away with the justification of a Tokyo merger, his words clipped and impatient, as if her questioning was an annoyance. It was the scent on his collar, not the sharp citrus he wore, but a sweet, cloying floral that clung to the fibers of his suit jacket like a stain. It was the way his smiles became thinner, his touch, when it happened at all, feeling less like affection and more like a perfunctory pat on the head for a prized pet. The discovery, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation but a quiet, digital blade to the heart. Richard had left his personal laptop open on the monolithic black desk in his study, a rare oversight for a man who prized control above all else. A single email was visible on the screen, its subject line a casual, brutal stab. Dinner tonight. Ethel was impossible to book, a temple of modern gastronomy where reservations were a mark of supreme status. He had told her they were on a 2-year waiting list. Her hand, trembling slightly, moved the cursor. She clicked. The email chain opened, a digital scroll of his betrayal. It was from his protégé, a young, ambitious analyst named Chloe. The messages were a sickening blend of corporate strategy and illicit intimacy. Plans for a hostile takeover of a rival firm were interwoven with plans for their weekend in the Hamptons. But it was the last message that shattered the sterile silence of the room. Cannot wait for Ethel, Chloe had written. And don't worry about Elle. She's too pathetic to ever suspect a thing. She just sits in her tower, waiting for you. It's almost sad. Below it, Richard's reply, sent just an hour before. A single, chilling word that echoed with condescending amusement. Almost. The word hung in the air, heavier than the marble, colder than the glass. Pathetic. The initial shock was a physical blow, sucking the air from her lungs. A wave of grief, hot and nauseating, washed over her. She saw herself as they saw her, a ghost, a footnote, a sad, pathetic creature in a gilded cage. She stumbled back from the desk, one hand protectively, instinctively, cradling the gentle swell of her belly. This wasn't just about her anymore. This child, this innocent life inside her, would not be born into a legacy of humiliation. She sank onto a cold leather chair, the luxurious material feeling like a shroud. For a long, silent hour, she let the grief have its way. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks, dripping onto the fine silk of her blouse. She mourned the man she thought she had married, the life she thought they were building. She visualized the cliché future, the screaming matches, the tearful divorce, the public pity, the victim. And then, something shifted. The sorrow, having burned itself out, left behind an empty space. And into that void, a new emotion crept in, not hot and messy like grief, but cold. It was a pure, clarifying anger. It was the steel in her spine she had inherited from a long line of women who had endured wars and depressions, women who bent but never broke. The word echoed again, but this time it wasn't an indictment. It was a catalyst. Pathetic. No, not anymore. A single, humorless laugh escaped her lips, a foreign sound in the quiet room. He thought her quietness was weakness. He thought her gentleness was ignorance. He had never once, in their 5 years of marriage, asked about her life before him. He knew her father had been a historian, a stuffy academic in his eyes, but he had never inquired about the subject of his life's work. He had no idea that her father, Dr. Alastair Finch, had been the world's foremost expert on the psychology of dynastic collapse, that he had spent 50 years documenting how the hubris of powerful men, their blind spots and their vanities, led to the ruin of their empires. And she, Eleanor, hadn't just been his daughter. She had been his archivist, his apprentice. For a decade, she had lived and breathed that knowledge. She had cataloged the archives, cross-referenced the data, and built the digital database that was her father's true magnum opus. She knew the patterns. She knew the pressure points. She knew, with chilling certainty, exactly how men like Richard Sterling fall. A new plan began to form, not a messy plot of revenge, but a cold, precise corporate strategy. He wanted to play in the arena of power? Fine. She would meet him there. She stood, her movements now filled with a purpose that had been absent for years. She walked to her wardrobe and selected a dress, a deep emerald green silk that she knew he loved. It was the dress she wore on their first anniversary, a night he had claimed was the happiest of his life. A lie. Everything was a lie. Then she made a call. Not to a lawyer, not yet. She called her father's solicitor in London. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's Eleanor Sterling. My father's will. The final transfer of the archives. Is it complete?" There was a pause on the other end. "Miss Finch." "Eleanor." The old man corrected himself gently. "Yes. The digital keys to the Finch archive were transferred to your secure server this morning. His entire life's work. It is all yours now. His inheritance. Her inheritance. Not money. Something far more valuable. Knowledge. Ammunition." She ended the call and looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The city lights glittered behind her, but for the first time, she felt bigger than them. The queen was approaching the traitor's feast, and she was going to burn his kingdom to the ground. The restaurant, Ethel, was a hushed cathedral of modern wealth. Soft lighting glinted off polished silver and crystal, and the air was thick with the scent of money and truffles. Richard Sterling sat at the best table, a corner booth that offered a panoramic view of the dining room. He was in his element, the king holding court. Opposite him, Chloe leaned forward, her red dress a slash of scarlet against the muted tones of the room. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a picture of triumphant ambition. And then Marcus told the board that the Sterling Takahashi deal was a sure thing. Richard was saying, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "They practically handed me the keys to their entire Asia-Pacific division." He took a sip of his wine, a ludicrously expensive Bordeaux that tasted like victory. He felt invincible, a titan astride the world. That was when he saw her. Eleanor. She was standing at the entrance of the dining room, and for a heart-stopping moment, the entire room seemed to fall silent. It was not a timid entrance. She walked not like a scorned wife, but like a queen making a procession into her court. The emerald silk of her dress flowed around her, a river of dark jade. Her hand rested on her pregnant stomach, a gesture that was both maternal and regal. Every eye in the room, which was every eye that mattered in the city, turned to her. The power dynamic of the room didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed around her. Richard felt a cold dread snake up his spine. This was not the quiet, pliable woman he had left at home. This was a stranger. Her eyes, which usually held a soft, deferential light, were now chips of ice. They swept over the room before landing on his table, on him, on the woman sitting beside him. Chloe's laughter died in her throat. Her face, moments before flushed with victory, paled. Eleanor moved towards them, her steps unhurried and deliberate. The whispers followed her like a wake. Richard half rose from his seat, a protest forming on his lips, but it died before it could be born. He was frozen, a statue in his own arena, suddenly stripped of his power. She stopped beside their table, a silent, magnificent fury. "Eleanor," Richard managed, his voice a strained whisper. "What are you doing here?" Her gaze didn't waver from his. "I believe this is a celebration," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an impossible weight of authority that cut through the restaurant's hushed ambience. The Sterling Takahashi deal. A true masterpiece of corporate strategy. Chloe, recovering a sliver of her brash confidence, let out a small, condescending scoff. "He's a genius," she said, her voice dripping with possessive pride. "Something you probably wouldn't understand." Eleanor's eyes finally moved, settling on Chloe with a look of such profound, cold pity that the younger woman visibly flinched. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "I understand that Richard promised Mr. Takahashi a controlling interest in his European logistics network, a promise he made in an off-the-books meeting last Tuesday. I also understand he has no intention of honoring it. He plans to use a shell corporation, funneled through his COO, Marcus Thorne, to dilute Takahashi's shares into worthlessness within 6 months. The blood drained from Richard's face. Chloe stared, her mouth slightly agape. How? How could you possibly know that?" Richard stammered, his mind racing. It was impossible. Those details were known by only 3 people, him, Marcus, and Chloe. "You have a tell, Richard," Eleanor continued, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. "The same one your grandfather had before he lost his shipping empire in 1958. When you are about to commit a truly profound act of betrayal, you order a bottle of 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. You think it's a toast to your own cleverness. It's actually a confession." She let the historical parallel hang in the air, a piece of knowledge so specific, so intimate. It was like a stiletto blade pressed against his throat. And then came the detonation. With a calm, fluid motion, she reached for the pristine white tablecloth. Richard's eyes widened in horror. "Eleanor, don't. Shatter." With a single, violent tug, she pulled. The entire tablescape, the plates of meticulously arranged food, the half-empty bottle of wine, the crystal glasses, the polished silver, crashed to the floor in a deafening symphony of destruction. Red wine, the color of blood, sprayed across Chloe's scarlet dress and Richard's pristine white shirt, branding them both. Gasps echoed through the dining room. The illusion of civility was gone, replaced by a raw, shocking tableau of ruin. In the stunned silence that followed, Eleanor stood untouched amidst the wreckage. She looked down at Richard, who was now spattered with wine and shame, a king dethroned in front of his entire court. "Pathetic," she said, her voice a low, final judgment. She used their own word against them, turning it from an insult into a verdict. Then, without another glance, she turned. Her exit was as regal as her entrance. She walked through the silent, staring crowd, her head held high, a queen leaving the ruins of a conquered city. She did not run. She did not look back. She simply left him there, a fool in a ruined suit, surrounded by the debris of his lies. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Before Eleanor's car had even reached the bridge, the story was spreading through the city's elite like a contagion. Gossip blogs lit up with grainy cell phone pictures of the shattered table, of Richard's wine-stained shirt, of Chloe's horrified face. But it quickly transcended mere gossip. By morning, the incident at Ethel was a footnote in the business section of every major newspaper. The narrative had shifted. Richard Sterling, the titan of industry, was recast overnight as Richard Sterling, the fool, the betrayed husband, the humiliated CEO. The Sterling Takahashi deal, the one he had toasted with such arrogance, evaporated. Mr. Takahashi, a man who valued honor and face above all else, pulled out, citing a crisis of character in the Sterling leadership. The market, smelling blood in the water, reacted with vicious speed. The stock of Sterling Industries plummeted, wiping out billions in value in a single trading session. His empire, built on a reputation of cold, calculated invincibility, was crumbling because he had been publicly proven to be just another faithless, reckless man. But the true blade was yet to fall. While Richard was frantically trying to stanch the bleeding, to reassure investors and salvage his reputation, the viper in his own nest struck. Marcus Thorne, his loyal COO, the man he had conspired with, called an emergency board meeting. He presented a dossier detailing not just Richard's affair, but a pattern of reckless behavior, financial risks concealed from the board, and, most damningly, the fraudulent shell corporation scheme Eleanor had exposed. He painted Richard as an unstable liability. The mistress, Chloe, was revealed for what she was, a honey trap, a willing co-conspirator who had been feeding information to Marcus for months. The board, panicked by the stock crash and the public humiliation, voted unanimously. Richard Sterling was exiled from his own company, stripped of his title as CEO and barred from the building he had built. The king was in exile. He retreated to the cold, silent mausoleum of his penthouse, but the space no longer felt like a throne room. It felt like his tomb. The panoramic view of the city was no longer a symbol of his power, but a monument to his failure. The calls stopped coming. The sycophants vanished. He was left alone with the roaring silence and the ghost of his own hubris. Stripped of his power, his wife, and his mistress, he was forced, for the first time in his life, to confront the man in the mirror. And he found nothing there he recognized, only the faint, mocking echo of his father's failures, the very thing he had spent his life running from. While Richard's world imploded, Eleanor retreated. She left the cold marble of the penthouse behind and drove north, to the small, book-lined cottage on the coast where her father had lived and worked. The air here smelled of salt and old paper, a scent of authenticity that was a balm to her soul. This was her safe harbor, a place of truth, far from the gilded cage and its sterile lies. Surrounded by her father's life's work, she wasn't the broken wife of a fallen tycoon. She was Eleanor Finch, the keeper of the archives. Her inheritance was not a passive collection of books. It was a weapon. The Finch archive was a vast, cross-referenced digital database detailing the inner workings of nearly every major corporate dynasty of the last century. It contained not just financial records and public statements, but private letters, unpublished memoirs, and psychological profiles. Her father had understood that empires are not built or broken by numbers alone, but by the passions, fears, and fatal flaws of the men who lead them. For weeks, Eleanor worked with a quiet, focused intensity. With the unborn child growing within her, she sat at her father's old oak desk and unleashed her secret, formidable skill. She wasn't a coder or a financier. She was a strategic historian. She began to dissect the corporate coup that had unseated Richard. She cross-referenced Marcus Thorne's career, his mentors, his financial backers. She dove into the history of his family, his psychological profile, his known associates. Her father's archive was like a key that unlocked the hidden architecture of the city's power structure. She found the threads, the faint connections, the hidden patterns that no one else could see. She discovered that Marcus Thorne's ambition was not his own. He was a puppet, financed by a shadowy consortium of old money rivals whom Richard had crushed on his way to the top. They had waited, patiently, for the perfect moment of weakness, for the fatal flaw they could exploit. His arrogance was the flaw. Chloe was the tool. Marcus was the knife. Eleanor began building a new kind of empire, not of glass and steel, but of information. She used her knowledge to create a counter-narrative, a detailed, irrefutable dossier that laid the entire conspiracy bare. It was a masterpiece of investigative research, backed by historical precedent and unimpeachable data drawn from the archive. Her work was the philosophical opposite of Richard's. It was not about brute force and deception, but about truth, meticulously assembled and expertly deployed. One evening, a secure, encrypted email arrived from an anonymous source. It was a single audio file. She clicked play, and her blood ran cold. It was a recording of Marcus Thorne speaking with his backers, laughing as he described how he had used Richard's predictable ego and pathetic affair to bring him down. He openly mocked Richard's blindness and detailed his plan to dismantle Sterling Industries and sell it for parts. Listening to it, Eleanor was faced with an impossible choice. She could let Richard burn. He deserved it. He had betrayed her, humiliated her, and shattered their life. Or she could intervene. She looked down at her stomach, feeling the gentle kick of her child. This wasn't just Richard's legacy anymore. It was her child's legacy, too. She refused to let it be a story of ruin and deceit, stolen by lesser men. She had to save the kingdom, not for the fallen king, but for the heir. The call was made from a burner phone. Richard answered on the second ring, his voice hollow and defeated. "Hello, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "We need to talk." The meeting took place on her turf. He arrived at the small coastal cottage looking like a ghost of the man he once was. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face was gaunt, and the arrogance had been completely stripped from him, leaving behind a raw, uncertain vulnerability. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of the book-filled living room, a deposed king seeking entry into a world he had never bothered to understand. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice cracking. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I'm not interested in your apology, Richard." She cut him off, her tone all business. "I'm interested in salvaging our child's legacy from the jackals who are currently tearing it apart." She laid it all out for him. The conspiracy, the consortium of old rivals. Marcus Thorne's role as a puppet. She played him the audio recording. As he listened, his despair morphed into a slow-burning fury, but it was a different kind of anger now, less about his wounded pride and more about the violation of the company he had built. For the first time, they were not husband and wife, but two strategists in a war room, united against a common enemy. A fragile alliance was forged, not of love, but of necessity. The final showdown was not in a restaurant or a penthouse, but in the sterile, airless environment of a Sterling Industries emergency shareholder meeting. Marcus Thorne was at the podium, confidently outlining his vision for the restructured company, a euphemism for its liquidation. He was smug, victorious, the viper who had successfully swallowed the lion. Then, the doors to the auditorium opened. Eleanor walked in, not as a victim, but as a major stakeholder, having used her own funds to purchase a significant block of the company's devalued stock. Beside her, looking humbled but resolute, was Richard. A gasp went through the room. Marcus paled. "You have no right to be here, Richard," he snarled. "He is here at my invitation," Eleanor said, her voice amplified by the microphone she took at a second podium. As a consultant to a concerned shareholder. What followed was not a shouting match, but a clinical, brutal execution. Eleanor calmly and methodically presented her evidence. She laid out the historical animosity between the backing consortium and Sterling Industries. She detailed Marcus's financial ties to them, presenting bank records that were impossible to deny. She projected timelines and data points on the screen behind her, drawing a direct, irrefutable line from their conspiracy to the company's collapse. And then, she played the audio recording. The sound of Marcus Thorne's voice, filled with gleeful, treacherous laughter, filled the auditorium. It was a confession in his own words. The shareholders sat in stunned silence. The viper was exposed, his skin peeled back for all to see. The vote was a landslide. Marcus Thorne and his co-conspirators on the board were removed. In the new order that followed, Richard was reinstated, but not as king. The board, now loyal to the woman who had saved them from ruin, offered Eleanor the position of chair. The power dynamic was officially, permanently, and publicly inverted. He was the CEO, but he answered to her. The kingdom was saved, but the queen was now on the throne. Months later, in the quiet, sterile white of a hospital room, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. Richard was there, not as a powerful tycoon, but as a terrified, humbled man in the corner, offering water, his hands trembling. The birth of their child felt like the death of their old life and the first, fragile breath of something new and uncertain. A year passed. They did not reconcile. They lived in separate, more modest homes. The penthouse had been sold. His visits were for his daughter. He would come over, not in a suit, but in jeans and a sweater, and he would fix a leaky faucet or assemble a new crib. He brought groceries. He read bedtime stories. He was quiet, respectful, and endlessly patient. The silence between them was no longer a roaring accusation, but a comfortable, healing space. One evening, as he was about to leave, he paused at the door. "Eleanor," he said, his eyes meeting hers. There was no artifice left in them. "I know I can never earn your forgiveness. That's not what this is. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to earn your respect, and being the father our daughter deserves." She gave him a small, genuine smile, the first one in years. "That's a good place to start, Richard." It was not a promise of reunion, but it was a promise of redemption. A long, difficult road, but a road they could, perhaps, walk in the same direction if not side by side. In the end, this story teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of power and respect. It shows that true strength is not found in control, dominance, or the gilded cages we build to display our success. It is found in quiet intelligence, in hidden depths, and in the steel resolve that is forged in the fires of betrayal. Redemption is not about getting back what you lost, but about becoming worthy of what you hope to build anew. It is a testament to the fact that those who are underestimated are often the most powerful, and that a person's true value is never an asset to be owned, but a force to be reckoned with.